Let's go beneath the waves of the Pacific during World War II, when a silent predator stalked its prey, a submarine, armed to the teeth, prowling the depths in pursuit of enemy vessels. This was the USS Pampanito, a Balao-class submarine which carried out missions that defined history, surviving torpedo ambushes, rescuing prisoners of war, and delivering devastating blows to the Axis powers. But its story doesn't end with war. After years of perilous combat, the Pampanito's journey took a surprising turn, leading it to the bustling shores of San Francisco. So, how did this wartime relic become a celebrated symbol of resilience and history, permanently docked at the Fisherman's Wharf? Stay tuned to find out, as today we discover the story of the USS Pampanito. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Our story starts in the early 1940s, during World War II, when the United States of America worked hard to construct various types of sea craft for the Allied war efforts. And in this context, the construction of the USS Pampanito began on March the 15th, 1943. In tradition with boats like the USS Pampanito and USS Permit, the Pampanito was named after a typical coastal fish worldwide. The construction occurred at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Maine, right alongside the USS Pampanito. Anyhow, the submarine was officially launched from port on July the 12th, 1943. This launch was highly celebrated, as the Pampanito was the first of two sea craft built in the Portsmouth construction basin. With further adjustments to the submarine, it was ultimately permitted to be a part of the U.S. naval fleet on November the 6th, 1943. Following its initial years as a war vessel, the crew that would board the submarine trained heavily on the waters of New London, Connecticut, where they practiced attacks, test-fired guns, and other equipment, such as shot exercise torpedoes. The crew aboard included Executive Officer Paul E. Summers and Coordinating Officer Lieutenant Commander Charles Jackson Jr., among other officials with prior submarine experience. Then, after these crewmates had said their goodbyes to the shore, they departed from New London on January the 15th, 1944. After traversing the Panama Canal, the USS Pampanito eventually arrived in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on Valentine's Day. Then, upon further repairs, refits, and various drills, the armed submarine left for its first war patrol on March the 15th, 1944, just 1 year after its construction began, marking the beginning of its tenure as a key war-going vessel in World War II. This submarine's war tour was extensive, but to best understand its service contributions, we'll do a small chapter about each of its 6 tours, starting with March the 15th, 1944 to May the 2nd. The first war patrol was carried out southwest of the Pacific islands of Saipan and Guam, and along the way, 2 of their torpedoes struck a destroyer. The Pampanito then retreated to Midway Island to refuel. The remainder of this tour was mostly uneventful, and after 54 days of being at sea, the submarine returned to Pearl Harbor, and thus the first war patrol was complete. The second war patrol lasted from June the 3rd, 1944 to July the 23rd that same year. During this time, the submarine operated in the Bungosudo Straits in the vicinity of some nearby Japanese islands. At one point, the crew was startled by 2 Japanese submarine torpedoes approaching through the dark water. By utilizing a zigzag retreat tactic, they were able to avoid their destruction. Then, after avoiding the torpedoes, the crew stayed around the area to garner information and intercept Japanese forces returning from the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Although unable to cause any damage to these targets due to weather complications and safety issues, on July the 6th, the crew landed a torpedo shot on an undetermined vessel, which drove in 2 armed amphibious transports, a tanker, and 3 escorts. The situation was agitated, to say the least, after planes began targeting the sub and a torpedo came only about 4 yards away from striking it. The crew ultimately elected to retreat back to Midway Island. The third patrol happened between August the 17th, 1944 and September. The USS Pampanito headed for the Luzon Strait north of the Philippines. At this point, the boat was packed with artillery, fuel, and several new features. These included Mark 18 electric torpedoes placed in the forward tubes and a radio key in the SJ radar, which enhanced communications. This specific mission was a Wolfpack operation, meaning other sea craft traveled alongside it. For example, the USS Growler and the USS Sea Lion II were companion craft. Unfortunately, due to communication issues, the Pampanito was not involved in the central confrontation of the patrol, which occurred on August the 30th with a Japanese convoy in Bashi Channel. You see, one of the torpedo tube operating rods had been slightly repaired, setting the Pampanito back slightly, and upon catching up and resetting, on September the 12th, 1944, a rather consequential confrontation occurred in the Luzon Strait. After the Growler performed a miraculous bow-to-bow surface attack on an approaching destroyer vessel, the Sea Lion landed 2 torpedoes against the Japanese cargo vessel. Unfortunately, this ended up being a POW ship, housing both British and Australians, many of whom died. After having retreated due to imminent threats of Japanese sea craft, the Pampanito returned to the site on September the 15th and was able to rescue 73 POW survivors. Then, tragically, while traveling to the port of Saipan, one additional casualty occurred, with the passing of POW John Campbell due to illnesses contracted at war. After refueling, collecting and distributing food to the survivors, the Pampanito began traveling back to Hawaii on September the 18th and arriving safely back at port 10 days later, after having conducted a very eventful third war patrol. The fourth war patrol occurred on October the 28th, 1944 to December the 30th. Upon communication systems being repaired, the USS Pampanito was included in a wolf pack of 4 U.S. submarines sent to search for Japanese convoys off the southern stretch of Hainan Islands, north to Hong Kong. The Pampanito was joined by the USS Pipefish, Sea Cat, and Sea Raven, vessels also constructed at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. The trip was eventful, as the Pampanito destroyed a large Japanese cargo ship. Though, despite its initial success, poor weather and a parted pipe aboard the sub caused a strain in the latter portion of the effort. From here, the Pampanito was moved to Australia to be refitted, thus ending its tenure in its fourth war patrol. The fifth patrol began on January the 23rd, 1945, and ran all the way up to February the 12th of the following year. Entering the Gulf of Siam with the USS Gavino, this short patrol saw a cargo ship sink on February the 6th. Then a passenger cargo ship was sunk shortly thereafter. Hence, it didn't take long for the sub to deplete nearly all of its torpedoes, causing the Pampanito to promptly return to the Philippines on February the 11th for a quick reset. But for context, the U.S. had recently captured this port, allowing submarine intake. Thus, the 5th Patrol concluded. Finally, the 6th and last war patrol began on February the 25th, 1945, and ended in the following April. Although there were no pings until March the 18th, a rendezvous with the USS Sea Robin on March the 11th delivered Christmas mail for those on board the Pampanito, which was quite a pleasant surprise in the middle of the sea. However, beyond this event, no other activity was reported, and hence the final war patrol of the USS Pampanito ended on a rather dull note, but fortunately, it never fell to the bottom of the sea. So, how did the submarine end up in California? Well, after being transported back to Pearl Harbor, the USS Pampanito was sent to San Francisco for an overhaul, and at this point, there was little left to do, as by August the 15th, the Japanese surrendered. This was a turning point. The submarine stayed in San Francisco, where it experienced an entirely different set of circumstances from when it was out in combat. With little left to do, the ship was officially decommissioned on December the 15th, 1945. From here, it rested at Mare Island in San Pablo Bay, California until April of 1960. The submarine began to be used for training as it was part of the Naval Reserve Submarine Division 11 through 12. However, once the 1970s rolled around, the Pampanito was stripped of its equipment in support of newer submarines. In the end, the vessel was officially stricken from the Navy Register on December the 20th, 1971. During this period, the submarine was largely inactive, as the Navy had no further use for the vessel. Though, in recognizing its historical significance, efforts were initiated to preserve the Pampanito as a museum and memorial. These endeavors culminated on November the 21st, 1975, when the submarine was officially converted into a memorial and museum, honoring its service and preserving its legacy for future generations. At this point, the submarine became a spectacle. By 1976, its ownership was handed over to the Maritime Park Association. After debates on where the ship would be permanently stationed, it was welcomed into the Fisherman's Wharf and publicly opened in 1982. By 1986, it was also declared a National Historic Landmark. Today, the USS Pampanito is still open for visitation, much of its equipment's been replaced, and maintenance is ongoing to ensure safety and cleanliness. Noble efforts in the preservation of American history. I always find these forgotten submarines so unexpected and interesting. So I wanted to ask you guys if you know about any other hidden submarines around America that we should cover. You can let me know by visiting our Patreon page and sending me a message over there. Otherwise, I hope you consider hitting the subscribe button. Until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.